So Jen, you are Oasis's lead workplace well-being consultant, and you bring to bear your 2 decades of experience as an employment lawyer, which gives you a perspective on what workplaces are like and what managers and HR professionals have to figure out. And you're also a clinical social worker, so you have your insights into interpersonal relationships. And we have this time in which we kind of have this trifecta. So we have some people who are anxious about returning to face-to-face work. Some of them may be clinically anxious. They may have social anxiety. Some of them may have fear of getting COVID in the workplace. They could have both fear of getting COVID in the workplace and social anxiety. We have this situation in which we don't know who's vaccinated. We cannot tell by looking. We have differences of individual opinion and kind of thresholds about what feels safe and what doesn't. People have different practices. Some of those practices are, as we've discussed, politicized. And sometimes it's more just a matter of, that sort of that personal threshold for risk that has nothing to do with politics at all. So we have this enormously difficult moment in time that bears on re-entering the workplace. So with these considerations in mind, how might HR professionals, small business owners, managers cultivate practices that enhance mental well-being during this stressful time and also reduce stress, uncertainty, and interpersonal conflicts?
Sure. Well, I just want to disclaim all of this by saying this should not be construed as legal advice at all. I'm sort of looking at it from a lens of the law as well as from a lens of mental health, but it's certainly not meant to be legal advice per se. My first caveat would be, as an employer, regardless of what it is that you do, you really shouldn't be asking specific questions about why or why not someone has chosen or not chosen to be vaccinated. Whether or not you ask if someone has received the vaccine is a very legitimate thing to be doing. But in terms of what you do after that, so now you know, and you sort of have people fleshed out into these categories, and how do you support people in both camps as an employer? It's meeting people where they are. And I think that's the first step in all of this. Certainly businesses that have been able to survive and thrive through the pandemic certainly don't want to now be re-entering this phase of no longer being in the pandemic and now losing their workforce and having real issues to contend with in that sense. So it's allowing people to feel what they feel, to hold space with them, and to recognize the good and the value that people bring to your organization and reward that by allowing people to lean into the things that make them feel comfortable, to speak about the things that make them feel uncomfortable. As a practical matter, whether or not an employer is going to allow their employees to flex time, to be in the office or out of the office, very specific, very personal, something you should be discussing with your legal team. But from a practical standpoint of what to do with it, it's recognizing the need that all of us have for community, and the idea that we haven't had that, even, being together on Zoom, being together in these sort of one-offs isn't the same thing as having a culture and having that sense of community again. So it's really cultivating that with your employees and finding ways to allow them to connect with one another. In terms of the other question that you asked, Sarah, and I know I'm sort of throwing a bunch of things out here in response, it's the very things that Dr. Losoff spoke of at the beginning, the same things that we would do as individuals to take care of ourselves when we're recognizing feelings of anxiety and feelings of panic come up. It's giving space in the workplace for that too, because ultimately we're all human and it's recognizing what it is that we're dealing with at any given time. It's allowing employees to set boundaries. It's having boundaries as an employer too, but it's being very forthright and very direct about what it is that you're feeling and leaning into that and sharing that with others. You know, one thing that really strikes me, and it's the sort of thing that we think of too when we think of people who have been on the front lines or healthcare workers or anybody else who is right there, the caretakers, the people who are in the throes of it. Well, HR people and managerial staff are now going to be stepping into those roles. They're going to have to be taking care of themselves while at the same time taking care of their workplace and taking care of the people who live in that workplace for those 8 hours a day, however that's going to be.
Why
And it
also, Jen, it just seems to me there's another huge thing is having to revise and re-revise repeatedly policies and practices that are having to evolve as the circumstances change. So there's an additional sort of burden of work, right?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's recognizing that these changes are happening in real time. So the need to pivot, the need to have sort of flexibility and a dynamic kind of interchange between all parties is essential as well, because it isn't the sort of thing that you can always prepare for beforehand too. Things are going to be coming up, and the need to keep revising and reworking and retooling is paramount in all of that.